Good morning. Everybody well? Yeah, it's good to be here. Good to be together. A number of people are unwell and joining online, so greetings to you. And if you're just joining us, welcome, welcome. It's great to be together. I'm going to say something which we all kind of know, which is this. We all have to live with rules. We all know that, don't we? I mean, some of the rules are okay and understandable, like when you drove this morning or when you were in a car this morning or however you traveled, public transportation, whatever it was, hopefully that vehicle followed the rules. I mean, it stayed on its side of the road. The aim of the game is to stay in between the lines. Hopefully this, vehicle went the way it was supposed to go in the direction it was supposed to go. And that's kind of a good rule. I mean, we understand that rule, don't we? Maybe you were cleaning something this weekend. Maybe you got some chemicals out. And the rules for how those chemicals are used actually protected you, because if they were the wrong chemicals, you would have burned your skin, or you could have caused damage to the surface, or you could have actually harmed other people who were in that house. So you see, there's rules that we all live by, and those are rules that we understand and rules that make sense, don't they? Sometimes we don't like them, but those are rules that we understand. And this is Mothering Sunday. I thought, well, what's a good rule that parents have? Some parents have this rule like, it's bedtime, stay in your room. Now, have you ever done that rule? If you have, can you raise your hand? Because I'd like to know how you got it to work, okay? Because, hey, I don't know. Just imagine. No, that's a really good rule, because your heart is, you want the child or children or whoever you're looking after, you want them to have a good night's sleep or rest well. And you're sitting downstairs, not you. Imagine somebody else. Just imagine somebody else, not you. Somebody else is sitting downstairs, and you're just starting to relax, and you've just kind of put your feet up, or you're catching up on that series that you've been wanted to catch up on, or that book, whatever it is, and you're just catching up, and you hear that pitter-patter of feet, and you hear that shuffling, and you hear that noise, and you think, oh. And then you start coming down the stairs, and there's that thing inside you, not you, sorry. There's that thing inside you that's kind of like, and the door starts to open, and as it opens, somebody might say this, I told you, it's bedtime, stay in your room. And then as the door opens a bit further, you can see red eyes, and you can see that snot stream that happens with little kids. It's like, I don't know what happens with snot streams. It just opens up, right? So all of a sudden they start crying, and it's just like, where in the world does all this snot come from, right? It's just clear waterworks that just and they're like this. And then you see on their little Paw Patrol PJs, they've got a little bit of sick on there, and you think, oh, maybe they got out of bed for some other reason. So you have a choice, not you, sorry. There's a choice to be made. Do you enforce the rule, or do you sort of, take care of the child? Because the rule is actually a good rule, which is I want to help you have a good night's sleep. And actually, by not following the rule, you actually still do the rule if you take care of the child. Somebody takes care of the child. Do you understand? You see, I don't know, we've all experienced this. I'm sure we've all experienced sometimes when rules are in our life, and sometimes when the rule is enforced, they actually enforce the rule in such a way that it violates the relationship. That all of a sudden, because in that moment, that parent, not you, of course, and never me, of course, but that other hypothetical parent who never gets it wrong. Anyway, I'm sure those of us who've tried to enforce rules sometimes in young people's lives, maybe we've done it in such a way that has actually not necessarily helped the relationship, but at times could hinder the relationship. And maybe I'm only speaking from my own litany of failures, so. but you understand what I mean, I presume, don't you? And I know it's slightly silly, but it's illustrative of the point that sometimes rules can actually hinder the relationship. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but it can happen a lot in religion. It doesn't have. It's not just religion. Let's not all of a sudden like poo-poo the church, because it can happen in educational systems, it can happen in processes, it can happen in politics, it can happen in lots of different situations. So it's not just religion, but we're in a religious context this morning, aren't we? We're in a church setting. So maybe it's easy to remember a time when a rule in a religious context has actually done something which has actually hindered the relationship. Maybe you've experienced that, or maybe you're just discovering or exploring what church is like, and you kind of have always thought, or maybe you've experienced that following Jesus or being part of a church just meant following the rules. Maybe follow Jesus and follow the rules are synonymous to you. Maybe that's your experience. Maybe that's been your upbringing. Or maybe that's just your perception. Because, of course, in religion, the better we keep the rules, then the better people we are. That's how religion works, you know. The better you keep the rules, then the better you are. So that's why religions like to keep the rules. But anyway. But maybe you've had an experience where, like that young child who came in, they potentially got shouted at. Maybe something was said over you, or maybe something happened to you, which actually put you off church. And I totally get that. And maybe it put you off God, maybe it put you off the whole idea of faith, maybe it put you off the whole idea of Christians, because somebody enforced a rule which was more important than cultivating the relationship. And if that happened to you, I totally get it, because that is actually rubbish. And maybe it was enough to make you walk away. Maybe it was enough to make you say, I've had enough of this whole church and Jesus thing. And if that's you today, I'm really sorry. I'm also super glad that you're here, whether you're joining us online or you're here in the room. If that's been your experience, I'm really sorry it happened, but I'm so glad that you're here, and that something in you says, I'm going to give it one more shot. So thank you. Thank you for journeying and exploring together, whether you're here against your will or not. But thank you for being here, because you're not the only person that experienced this, because Jesus had the same thing happen to him. Jesus had the same thing happen to him. And we know that it happened to him because Jesus had a group of friends, a group of followers. They're called disciples. And one of his disciples, a guy named John, actually wrote down his experiences, his firsthand eyewitness experiences. And Jesus was with John, and John was with Jesus, and they spent time together. They were together for years. And John made a record of the events, everything that took place. And that's what we've been looking at in this series. And John is this eyewitness of everything that happened. And John, at the end of his book, he writes this verse, and we've looked at it a couple times, but at the end of his book, he writes this thing. And what he says is this. He says that the signs, these things that were recorded, he calls them signs. And you know a sign is there to help you find your way or give you directions. These signs are written so that you may believe Jesus is the Son of God. And by believing in him, you can have life in his name. John is saying, you can believe who Jesus said he is, and by believing in who Jesus said he is, we can have life in his name. And this is what we've been looking at, this whole sort of series, all the way in the run-up to Easter. We're looking at this journey together. And John follows this pattern. John is taking us on a journey, because he wants you to come with him. And he's not forcing you to think the same way as him. He's not saying you must believe or you must do this. John is just showing you the signs along the way so you can journey with him. And here's how John's pattern works. He takes a specific event, so something takes place. He has this event, and the event itself is the sign, or a sign. It's more than an event. And that sign points to who Jesus is. So there's an event, which is a sign, which points to who Jesus is. And that's the pattern. That's the pattern that John follows with every single one of these events that he records. And John's total confidence was based on what he had seen. He didn't have to blindly follow Jesus. He didn't have to hope everything would work out. He followed Jesus because what he actually saw with his own eyes, what he experienced with his own hands. He was there. He experienced it. Full Technicolor event. I mean, he experienced it for real. And that's how he followed Jesus. And that's what he wants to share with us this morning. But let's get back to the story about the time that Jesus experienced some rules that missed the point. And we know John is an eyewitness because of the clues he gives in this story. And it's in John chapter 5. And what happens is it says that Jesus is they're going up to Jerusalem, and John tells us when. John says it's for one of the Jewish festivals. There is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool called Bethesda, and it's surrounded by 5 colonnades. So we'll just pause there. There's a few little clues in John's details there. The first clue, he's telling us when it's happening. It's a religious festival. And a lot of John's events are linked to the Jewish festivals, religious festivals. So he's gone up for one of the Jewish festivals. And these festivals were like a rhythm. They formed part of the cycle, if you like. They were just ingrained. They were part of the rhythm of how you always did things. And today's Mothering Day, Mother's Day, Mothering Sunday, it's a rhythm that we celebrate, isn't it? It's something that comes along, and it's something that we do, and it's important, and there's certain ways that you do it. Now, just imagine doing that, but your whole culture being shaped around following the rhythm of the religious festivals. And that's what's going on. This is what's happening. And these festivals are originally designed, God gave them to the Jewish people, which is the culture, the context that we're talking about here. And they were supposed to be gifts. The festivals were supposed to bring things like joy and hope, and they're supposed to be good things. Like Mother's Day is a good thing. It's supposed to remind you of good things. Yeah. So the rhythm in and of itself was there to be a good thing, to remind you of good things. And then the other thing that we know, how John is an eyewitness. He says there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool called Bethesda, and it is surrounded by 5 colonnades. When he's writing it, because this stuff is still there. There is here, and this is where it was, and this is what it's like. And archaeologists at first were like, what's a pool with 5 colonnades? What's a pool with 5 porches? And they found it. They've actually found it. And the way it's laid out and the way it's designed, it's got these 2 connections, and it's got 5 porches. They found 5 colonnades in this pool. You can look it up. Okay, you can do it when you get home. You can look up the pool, and the archaeologists have found it. So John's given us specific details about a specific pool in a specific place, and he's talking about it in the present tense. So I'm just showing you, it's an eyewitness encounter. It's an eyewitness experience. And John carries on with the story. So then he gets into some of the craziness. There's a great number of disabled people who are there. They got the blind, you got the lame, you got paralyzed, and they're waiting for the moving of the waters. Sometimes an angel of the Lord would come and stir the waters, and the first person in the pool would be cured. This is the most desperate people in that society. This is the most desperate people in that culture. They are the lame, the blind, the paralyzed. There was no social state. There was no additional system. There was no place for them to be or go. They were on the goodwill. They had nothing that they could essentially do. This is the most desperate of desperate people. And then this next bit, it talks about superstition. And even nowadays, if you think about, there's a certain pool in a certain place or a certain stream in a certain place, and somebody says it's got healing powers. Have you seen around the world how people flock to it? It still happens. They think that the water in and of itself can do something. And they've also found at this pool that the pool of Bethesda was fed by an underground stream, an underground brook. And when water levels changed, as they do, it would bubble for no apparent reason. And because people didn't know, essentially it was like, it must be an angel, it must be an angel. So they rushed to the water to get healed. And it was a place of superstition, a place of desperation and superstition. This is the environment where these people are. And then sort of carries on. John is totally creating the scene here, isn't he? He's really setting it. He's really painting the picture for us. And I can't imagine that you would really go there on purpose. If you think about it, you wouldn't really intentionally go there. It wasn't the place. If you're visiting Jerusalem, that wasn't the place you'd visit on your bucket list of sites, right? You can't imagine that people would actually go there on purpose. And maybe these people were taken by their families and put there and left there. Maybe these people lived there. We don't know. We don't know that detail. But you can imagine it's not where somebody would often go intentionally. especially not the healthy. But this is where Jesus takes his followers on purpose. Jesus wades into this desperate situation, a place of desperation and superstition. And maybe you've got people that are thinking about following Jesus, and it's more like superstition for them at the moment because they don't know any different. And Jesus walks into people's superstitions. He's not even frightened by superstitions. You see, he's not frightened by people's misconceptions and misunderstood ideas about what he's like. He's not even bothered. He just goes straight into this situation, and John tells us what happens next. So he goes into this setting, and one of the men had been there for 38 years. He'd been an invalid for 38 years, which is a long time. Nearly as old as me. Just kidding. And when Jesus saw him lying there and learned he had been in that condition for so long, he asks him a question, which is a really weird question, isn't it? Do you want to get well? I mean, 38 years for most of us, looking around the room, most of us, that's still like half of our lives. You know, for the oldest people in here, like 38 years would still be half of your life. Some of us, that could be all of your life. You might not even be 38 years old yet, like me. And and of course, you know, this is like your whole existence. I mean, have you been there for 38 years, and this guy comes up to you and actually asks you, do you want to get well? Which is kind of, let's be honest, a weird question. Because don't you think Jesus, I mean, he'd just be like, you know, do your thing. But John's sort of telling us how Jesus works and what's going on. He doesn't assume this. He just leans in and he asks him, do you want to get well? And I don't know if this is why he was asking it, but maybe it's still important. I don't know if you've ever dealt with something for so long that sometimes it's easier to stay that way than change. You ever had that experience? You ever dealt with something for so long that actually all the changes and all the stuff you got to put in to change living that way is actually harder than staying that way? You ever worked with somebody like that actually, they don't really want to get well? They say they do, but then you know they don't. Because they're not doing the things that they could do to help themselves get well. It's like the person who never sticks at a job and always blames the employers, when in reality it's the way that they treat other people. Or maybe it's the person that always wants somebody else to bail them out because they really just haven't taken the time to figure out how to manage your own finances. Or maybe it's because it's just so much easier being perceived as the victim rather than having to deal with the other things in my life that are bothering me. I'd rather let this be the priority than deal with the issues going on in my life. And of course, these are broad generalizations, but you kind of get the gist of what I'm talking about. Sometimes we can deal with stuff for so long or have gotten so used to being in a certain way that it's easier to stay that way than it is to change. Or maybe we don't want to change. And I think that's what Jesus is just asking. He's just saying, do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? Are you tired of being like this? Are you tired of being in this desperate position? Are you tired of living with superstition? Are you tired of the way things have been? Do you want to get well? Which is a really healthy question for all of us to wrestle with. Do we want to get well? If you're in a relationship, isn't it easier to blame your partner for all the problems in that relationship? Just being totally blunt. Rather than recognizing that most of the junk that comes out is actually because of what's in you, not because of what's out here. That's what Jesus told us. Anyway, you get the point. He asks him, do you want to get well? It's crazy. And then this is his answer, because he doesn't even know who Jesus is. Hello? I have no one to help me into the water. When I'm trying to get in, people get there before me. He's like, man, do I want to get well? I don't have anybody to help me. He's like, he's got no clue who Jesus is. Jesus is standing in front of him. Maybe you had this experience when you encountered Jesus the first time as well, and you just start having these experiences with Christ, and you don't even realize that it is Jesus, but Jesus is there, and he's right in front of this guy, and he's offering him something. And he doesn't even recognize it because he just doesn't know. And then Jesus says, two crazy words, get up. get up, get up. And the lovely thing about the Greek language, for those of you who are linguists, you understand this sometimes. In other languages, it's hard to translate it into English because the one word could actually mean lots of different nuances. And in the Greek, this word get up doesn't just mean like get up. It actually means like wake up. It means like revive. It means come back to life. It means so much more than just like, oh, hello, be alert, okay? It's actually come to life. It's actually come back. It's wake up. It's just like, in English, we struggle to describe it fully, but you get the picture if we use these other words to say Jesus is saying to this guy, come back to life. Wake up. Arise. Wake up. Get up. And it's this command. And then Jesus carries on. He's like, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. I don't know what the dude was thinking. I mean, right? He has no clue who Jesus is. This was not on his radar. He did not ask Jesus to do anything for him in his life. He did not even say, oh, Father, please do this. And if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. And he didn't say like, okay, yes, I'm gonna be yours forever. And yes, I'm going to pray to you now. He's not even doing any of that stuff. In fact, the guy didn't even really know what was going on. And Jesus still did an incredible encounter in his life because John is trying to tell us what God's heart is really like. It's not about our performance and our behavior. All of a sudden, it's Jesus' behavior towards us. You see, this is a crazy story. He's like, get up. And the guy's like, oh, okay. I don't know what happened. Did he just like, I don't know. Did he immediately follow? I mean, it says at once the man was healed. I don't know. He's just think about the story. Did his legs start twitching? And I mean, if you're not using your muscles for 38 years, wow. Yeah, what? He does it. He gets up. He rolls up his mat. He gets up, and he's walking, and he's better. And he's like, I imagine he's still wearing rags, and I imagine he didn't smell very well. I mean, you think about the Mediterranean sunshine, a whole group of people that can't even get in the water. Yeah, he must have had a nice little pong in that little pool area, didn't it? Yeah, I mean, this wasn't the nicest of areas, presumably. Where did they go to the toilet? I mean, come on, just think about the human side of these stories. Is he in rags and bits, and is his hair unkempt? Is his beard long? I don't know. But this guy gets up. Does he have any shoes? We don't know what he looks like, but these are the desperate of the most desperate people. And he gets up and he walks. And then John wants us to know that this is not just a lovely little story where Jesus went into a whole group of people and I don't know why he picked one person, but he picked one person. I don't know. He picked one person out of all this group, and he went over to that one person who didn't even ask for anything. And Jesus is in that environment. He goes into that space, and he picks this one person up, and he heals that one person. And John wants us to know something more is going on. And so this is where John starts to tell us the rest of the story and starts to bring in the rest of the details, because he tells us this bit here. And the day that this all took place was the Sabbath. He's told us that that's a festival season. So when it's the festival season, of course, like all of us who are good religious people, when it's a religious festival, all of the religious people come out in droves, don't they? Human nature, right? Think about it. Yeah. You ever work in a office where the area manager was going to be there? And the swattiest of the swats were there, like before the company opened that morning, weren't they? Right, and they were like dressed. Come on, this is true. Am I the only one that ever worked with people like this? Like the area manager was in town, and like it was just like all of a sudden the place was clean, and all the coffee cups are washed in the canteen, and it's just like your boss is like getting on you for leaving your coat on your chair, and you're like, what? Yeah. And it's a religious festival. We know it's a religious festival because John's already told us this is what's going on. It's a religious festival, and it's one of the religious days which happened every single week. Every 7 days it was the Sabbath. So it's a religious festival season, and it's a religious day. So John's given us a super clue about what's actually going on here. Pick up your mat and walk, because it's the Sabbath. And the Sabbath was super important for the Jewish people. It was one of their commands, the original command, keep the Sabbath. Yeah, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And on that day, there was no work to be done for 24 hours. And if you live in a religious system, you need to have religious police, don't you? It's true. It's just the way it is. You need to have religious police to make sure everything's done properly and enforcing the rules. So this guy's healed. He's rolled up his mat, and he's walking out of there. I don't know. He could be going to the temple. Because, see, in that day, you couldn't go to the temple if you were lame. He would have been excluded from going to give a sacrifice. And maybe that's where he's headed. Maybe he's going into a religious temple to offer. We don't know where he's going. Maybe he's just going to go get himself some food. Who knows what he's doing? Okay, but the guy's up and he's walking. And then this is what happens next. The Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "Today is the Sabbath. The law forbids you from carrying your mat." So technically, the law did not forbid you from carrying your mat. Technically, it didn't. Well, there was this thing called the tradition of the elders, which was like the oral law. It was what was passed on. It was what was not written down. It was what was said. And so it was. So when they say the law, well, it wasn't written in the law, but it was the oral law. So it was kind of like, it was the rules. It was the way things were said and done, the traditions of the elders, and it was this oral law. And in the oral law, there were like extra rules to protect the main rule. So they built up all these other little caveats and examples and how you have to maintain the real rule. And there were different categories of how you do this. And there was 39 categories. And as part of the application of what it meant to keep the Sabbath day holy, there were certain things that you couldn't do. And one of which was carrying things around, because that's work, especially like carrying your bed from place to place. That's classed as work. And so therefore, that was forbidden. So that's like a no-no. And these guys are more interested that a religious rule, the religious application, an oral rule has been broken. They're more interested in the fact that a religious rule has been broken than a man has just been healed who has spent most of his life lying in the dirt. We don't know how old he was. I mean, how long did you live back then? Just think about it. Did they live to the 70s? Did they live 60s, 50s? I mean, most of his life, if not half of his life, at a minimum, right? How long has this guy been there? How often has he showered? How often has he changed? When did he last use his Oral-B special toothbrush, and get the batteries changed? What did he look like? What did he smell like? And all of a sudden, the religious people, which is what happens with religious people sometimes, they're more concerned by the fact that he's broken a rule rather than the fact that his life has just been changed. And the guy doesn't understand everything yet. Of course he doesn't. He didn't even know who Jesus was. And sometimes religious people can shoot down people that are just exploring things and just discovering something for the first time, and they don't know what it's like. And we look at these people, and they smell funny, and they dress funny, and they got matty hair or whatever it is on the outside, but they got lots of guns going on the inside, and it's so easy to shoot them down and say, "How dare you do that? How dare you do that?" And sometimes the rule ruins the heart. It can damage the heart. It can destroy a relationship. And how many people have been pushed away when they're on the cusp of discovering what Jesus was like because something has happened in their life and all they've known before is desperation and superstition, and all we do is shoot them down. Not us, of course, not you, not us. You know that other parent that sits there and shouts at people? Yeah, that parent, not us. But these guys are more interested in the fact that a rule has been broken than that a heart has been healed. Whew, that's crazy. And sometimes the rules can get in the way. Most of you know, here's a little story, just to lighten the mood a bit. Let's lighten the mood, huh? No. So my wife's a teacher, and she had the story years ago. It's not local, so this is when we were in the Midlands. And there's a little boy, and he was falling asleep in the class. He kept putting his head kept going down on the desk. The rules are you don't fall asleep in class, right? And it's easy to shout. It's easy to say, that's a detention, that's a this, that's a consequence, whatever. It's very easy to dole these things out. It doesn't take any effort. But being the saint that she is, she said to him, you keep falling asleep. What's going on? And this little boy, do you know what he told her? That, I can't remember if it was mom or his dad, they'd been in a new relationship, and they moved to another partner's house. There was no room for him. And this new arrangement, they decided he was put in the shed in the garden. Nothing out there, wooden shed with a mat on the floor. And he didn't sleep because he was so frightened, and it was cold, and he was tired. And you see, as a teacher, you can just shout to that stupid little child for putting his head on the desk and breaking the rule, or you can do something which is going to actually cost you, which is you go out of your way and you say, what's going on? How are things? Of course, you can understand the situation had to be escalated and dealt with. And just imagine, what if she'd shouted at him as opposed to took a moment to find out what was actually going on? You think that child would trust an adult in the future? As young people, we carry things and we don't know how to express them sometimes. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could live in such an environment where we actually heal hearts first as opposed to shoot people down? And this child, maybe that turned something slightly in his heart, and he learned to trust teachers again, or he learned to trust an adult again, because he was in an environment where his own parents weren't trustworthy. It's a situation where, it's kind of a silly example, but you get the picture. We have to be careful about the rule, focusing on the rule and destroying the relationship, And the thing is, the point of the Sabbath was it was a gift for the people. It was a gift for the people. That was the point of it. This is true. You so know this is true because you tell me that you can work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. You can't. It's not humanly possible. It's not physically possible. So the Sabbath was a gift from God. It was intended to be a gift. Here's why. If you don't take a break, you will break. That's the Sabbath. If you don't take a break, you will break. See, the gift, the rules, the festivals, there's good things in them. They weren't meant to shut people down. They were meant to be gifts of good things. And so God's heart was saying, hey, stop your striving. There's certain things that you just can't get done all the time. Learn to find a rhythm of rest. See, this is what the heart of the Sabbath was for. The heart of the Sabbath was to allow people a gift so they don't break. But what happens is rules got added on, and they changed it, you see. And so any religious system can do this. Any political system can do this. You know this is true. You've experienced it. So these guys, these religious leaders, this is what they say to this guy next. They're like, whoa, how in the world did this happen? Why are you here walking? And the guy says, the man who healed me told me to pick up my mat and walk. And they said, who is this person that told you to pick up your mat and walk? They totally ignored the fact that he just said he was just healed. This man healed me, told me to pick up my mat and walk. Who told you to pick up your mat and walk? It wasn't like, who healed you? Did you notice that? So it's like, they're so focused on something else. They're so quick to judge. Who is this person? We're going to go after him now. That's what it is, yeah? And then it carries on, and it says this, the next verse. The man who had been healed had no idea who it was because Jesus had slipped away into a crowd. Isn't that crazy? It's a funny story, isn't it? You got all these people, tons of people around. It's a religious festival. It's the Sabbath. He goes into this place, this cacophony of a place. He heals somebody, and then he's like, right? He slips away. Yeah, this is what an eyewitness would tell you about the story, right? You'll never believe next. So then this guy's getting in trouble, and these guys are shouting at him, and then they're like, what's going on? And we turn around and like, Jesus is gone. We don't know where he's gone. Jesus is like, he's scarpered. He just like slipped away. Man, it's like Jesus kicked the hornet's nest on purpose. It's intentional. You couldn't read the story and think it was an accident. It's not a random act of kindness. Jesus intentionally picked this person. Jesus intentionally healed this person. Jesus intentionally told him to get his mat and walk. And Jesus then intentionally walked away. It's all on purpose. It's not some random kindness. Yeah? It's not some random thing. Yeah? And then John tells us what's going on, because remember, John follows a pattern. There's an event, which is a sign, which points to who Jesus is. Then John says this: because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. And do you know what Jesus says to them? This is what he says in response. Later on, they find him. Jesus says, my Father is always at work, even today. So I'm working too. I mean, that is just like a red rag to a bull. Yeah? You catch what he's saying here? They're like, why are you doing these things? Who are you to tell this man he can do this? Why would you tell him to pick up the mat? They catch him later on, and Jesus says to them, my Father, he's always working. I don't take a day off. He doesn't take a day off, so I'm not taking a day off. Right? I mean, you catch what he's saying to these people? Yeah. And then they caught it, because the next verse says, for this reason they tried to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was calling God his Father, and making himself equal with God. You see, he is like really kicking the hornet's nest here, isn't he? It'd be so shocking. It'd be so shocking, right? It's so shocking. I mean, their response would be that, who does he think he is? Who was that man that healed you? Who's done this? Who's done that? And then they're like, whoa, who does he think he is? Which is a really good question. Who does he think he is? John would sort of tell us, you know the answer to that, because he's just told you. Yeah. He said this. He said, my Father is always at work, even today, so I'm going to keep working too. They get riled up, and of course, for this reason, they try to kill him, because not only is he breaking the Sabbath, now he's calling God his Father, and he's making himself an equal to God. So Jesus knew exactly who he was. Who does he think he is? Well, he knows who he is, and he's just told them who he is. He's saying, I am the Son of God, and I am equal to God. I mean, that's crazy talk. Crazy talk. This is why this whole thing isn't a random act of kindness. It's not just, Jesus he wasn't just healed for no reason. It's a sign. It's a sign. It points to something. And John is saying this sign points to who Jesus is, and who Jesus is the Son of God, and who Jesus is equal to God. This is what John is telling us about, through this story, which is crazy. So instead of us asking the question, who does he think he is? The question turns to us, because basically it turns into, who do we think he is? So this is where the story goes with John. And Jesus is standing right there in front of those religious people who have spent their entire life waiting for the Messiah. And he's right there, and they don't know who he is. Just like the man at the pool who was there for most of his life. And Jesus is in front of him, and he didn't know who he was. But one person was willing to learn, and one person was not. He's right there in front of them. You know, the very thing that they've been aching for, longing for, the gift of life is actually right there in front of them, and they're not even ready to see it or even receive it. And he carries on this conversation. We just jump ahead for a few verses, and it says this. Jesus said to them, he said, "This is the truth. Whoever hears my words and believes the one who sent me will have eternal life." They're not going to be found guilty because they've already crossed over from death to life. The time is coming, and it's actually here now, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will have life. Isn't that cool? If you think about it, isn't that exactly what John just witnessed happen? John just witnessed that entire thing. John saw Jesus walk over to a man, and he heard Jesus speak to him. And that man believed that Jesus had life. And they're not guilty. They've crossed over from this death. They've crossed over from death into life. He's not breaking a rule by picking up his mat. He's crossed over from a death which was driven by rules. He's crossed over into a new way of life, a new way of living. And the time is coming, and it's here now, when the dead will hear the voice of God, hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear it will have life. John just saw that happen in the flesh, in the real life. Jesus leaned over to a man who was as good as dead, and he said, "Come back to life." And that man got up, and that man crossed over from something which was death, and he crossed over into a place of life. He's not being judged. He's not guilty for what he has done. Jesus has pursued him and found him and redeemed him and rescued him and restored him and brought him from this place down here of death and brought him to life. And the man did nothing to deserve it, nothing to earn it, nothing. He didn't ask for it. He didn't pray for it. He didn't say, "Jesus, do this for me." He didn't do anything. John has just saw this entire episode happen in front of his very eyes. Jesus brought a man back from the brink of death and gave him life. See, John is writing about an event which is a sign which does one thing. It points to who Jesus is. Why? Because he wants to show us these signs so we can also believe who Jesus is. He's taking you on the same journey that he was on, the same sort of rhythm, the same thing that he was on. And John is like, you can trust me. This is what I saw happen. I was an eyewitness. You can trust me. Trust me. And people like to say that Jesus was a good teacher. You just have to read this one story to know that he was so much more than a good teacher. Yeah. He did more than just nice things for people. He did a really nice thing for this guy, but actually it was so much more than that because of the conversation he had with the religious leaders, right? He's so much more than a nice teacher. He's so much more than a moral philosopher. He's so much more than a good guy. And Jesus makes it so explicitly clear. Jesus said he is the Son of God. Okay, now he's a loony, right? He's a wacko. He's a crazy guy. Yeah. He's got to be a crazy guy, right? He's got to be, because he's just said he's the Son of God. And not only is he the Son of God, he's like equal to God. Okay, he's a wacko. He's a nut job, yeah? Okay? You can't have him as a good teacher if he's talking about this kind of stuff. We can't. Okay, he's such a good teacher that he thinks he's the Son of God. Okay, so what, he's a loony bin now? So, right? So something more must be going on. This is what John is saying. The something more that is going on is Jesus is telling the truth. He is the Son of God. And this is how we know he's the Son of God, because the God, understands what Sabbath is for. Jesus is saying, I'm bigger than the Sabbath. I'm bigger than all your rules. I understand what it is, you see. This is what is happening in this story. And John wants us to know that Jesus is the one that can undo the dead in us. He wants us to understand that you can trust in Jesus because Jesus is the one who has the words of life. And if you hear and believe, you'll have the words of life. There's that word again, life. We talked about it a few times already in this whole series. He brings it up on all of these signs. He brings it up. You can have the words of life. And he is the life that breaks the chains of religion. And maybe that's been your experience. I don't know. Maybe you feel more like the religious leaders in these stories rather than the man that's been rescued. I don't know who you identify with more. Maybe you identify with this man who was rescued, and that really is where you are. Or maybe you identify more with the religious leader. Jesus is the one who can restore the dead to life, and Jesus is the one who can break the chains of religion. He does both. So wherever we are today, wherever our hearts are, whatever we've got going on in our lives, whether you're in a desperate place and you don't even know who Jesus is and you're full of superstition and you're just not even sure what's what, I'd encourage you to consider this sign. This sign points us in a direction, and the direction it points us in is Jesus. He's got the words of life. Or maybe we're more like the religious leaders and we just need somebody to set us free from those chains. Because it's not living. It's another kind of death, isn't it? And so the question then becomes, who do you think he is? Do you think he's just a nice teacher? Do you think he's just some guy that does occasional signs for people? Or do you think he's just a nut job? He's a wacko, he's a crazy person because he says he's the Son of God. Who do you think he is? Is he the one that can bring the dead to life? Is he the one that can break the chains of religion? I don't know, but see, this is where this is where the whole story pulls to. Who do you think he is? Who do you think he is? He's for you. He's not against you. God is for you. He's not against you. We're going to close and just pray now. Heavenly Father, God, we thank you so much for who you are. Thank you for these stories that John writes and records that just show us what you're like. Thank you that we have this eyewitness account to help guide us. And God, I just pray for anybody today who's been offended or hurt or wounded when somebody enforced a rule and it damaged their heart. God, I just ask for healing. Just ask for healing, Father. And for any of us who are more predisposed to keeping the rules, help us to not damage the relationship with others at the same time, God. Father, help us. And I just pray for everyone who's here this morning, whether they're in the room or online, God, that you would speak to them and be with them. For anyone who's exploring and just discovering what you're like, I ask that you would begin to show yourself. Thank you so much for these stories about who you are. In your name we pray. Amen. If you have any questions, we'd absolutely love to speak to you, love to chat to you about anything that you might have any questions about following Jesus. We're carrying on with this theme. We're going to carry it on next week as well. We're going to run with this theme all the way up until Easter. If you'd like another drink, there's plenty of drinks. And if you could go and collect your kiddos by 12, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Have a good week.